incompatible with paganism and heathenry eventually. But what I wanted to say to Tim is there's actually a lot of Druid groups that accept atheists. And if he were to look around, he wants to get involved with that. You mentioned the Unitarian Universalists, and they actually have a subsection called CUPS, CUUPS, where you can be a Druid and also be an atheist. The same is true with the Reformed Druids of North America, which are very, very agnostic and atheist. And then I belong to an organization called Ardriochfain, which is a Druid organization, also called a Druid Fellowship. And it is also, that organization does not dictate belief at all. It's completely orthopraxy, and not orthodoxy. So if he wanted to look for an ADF group or an RDNA group up in Washington, he could probably find people of more of a like mind. It's also in Druidry, it's very unusual to have something called a coven. Usually they're called a grove, and they do have high priests and high priestesses, but they call themselves mostly just Druids. So anyway, I had to throw that out there.
I think the reason that his was called a coven, though, is just because it was eclectic. So we had Wiccans in there as well as various other forms of pagan, and he was the one Druid amongst the group.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think from my experience, you have to be very strong when you're in those kind of groups, because sometimes not having people that are on the same wavelength as you can be really difficult. And as you know, in all religions, the person that's the head cheese is the one who winds up kind of trying to call the shots. It's not supposed to be that way in a lot of pagan groups, but it is.
Yeah, that's with any organization, though. You know, I mean...
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
for sure. You know, I love, Karen, when you call in, because you always come in with the most informed, like, you just give me so much information, and I'm sure the other viewers really appreciate it, because this is just, you know, like, this is stuff that I can read about sometimes, and you know, but it's not the same when it's coming from somebody who is talking about their own personal experiences in these groups and talking about what it's like in the real. So I always appreciate it when you call, but you were wanting to call about the winter solstice and stuff, and I'm kind of curious about that.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to let you know, I have a degree in anthropology, and I spent many years in paganism, and I also went to seminary and so on. So I'm going to tell you right here in Sacramento right now, it's really dreary. It's all dark, and today's the solstice, the shortest day of the year. And there's a lot of Mexican Americans in our area, and they practice a custom called posada. And I wanted to talk about the cult of the dead. Now, I know Christians don't think of their religion as a cult of the dead, but as I was explaining to my Jewish husband the other day, if you were to walk into a church and go to the front of the church and see this dead guy hanging on a cross who had been tortured, that looks pretty much like a cult of the dead, I think, to anthropologists. So the reason I'm calling about this is I thought it would be interesting to talk about some of the customs of Christmas and what they actually shield us from. Now, in ancient times, you know, we don't think about this being Americans and having 24/7 electricity and light and everything. But back in ancient times, and if you've ever lived in Northern Europe, you know it gets dark around 3 p.m. And it's very cold, and they couldn't, in ancient times, they couldn't keep the food supply up very much in the winter. So Christmas, which was originally a pagan, I believe it was originally a pagan tradition, although it was added on to by the Christians later, was very much about death and the cult of the death. And I know that Suris has a co-host called Ocean, so I'm sure Ocean would be able to speak to how Odin, the god Odin, was actually the god of death, who went around during the winter on the wild hunt and harvested souls of people that were dying naturally, well, not naturally, but it was more natural in the sense that when people died from the cold and hunger, you know, it was part of the seasonal experience of humans. And I guess the point I'm really trying to make here is that Christmas is a festive time that keeps us from feeling that despair that a lot of us feel during the holiday. Today, I was just so down, and I didn't know why, because I have no reason to be down, really. But I think this is something that we as atheists should be addressing, because what are we going to, how are we going to address so many people that cling on to these ancient beliefs? I think a lot of people become religious, and so was I, because we're looking forward to an afterlife.
Yeah, there is something to be said about atheists celebrating Christmas, right? And just kind of the holidays in general, for people who don't swing in the Christianity kind of way, I guess. There, because we're surrounded mostly by people who do believe in these things and who take these kinds of rituals very seriously. Most of us, myself included, by the way, are going to be forced to go to church on Sunday because, well, I say forced. I'm letting myself go in. I mean, I'm an adult. I don't have to, but I want to participate because I want to be there with my family, and I want to, be a part of the ritual and have it something be meaningful for them, right? And it's awkward. Like, there's no real way, there's like no general advice I can give to people that says, here's what you should do, because like every family situation is different and everybody has their own kind of traditions and ways of doing things. What are your thoughts on this, Suris?
I'd say for me, the argument's been made time and time again that Christmas, or pretty much all of these holidays that occur around this time of year, whenever somebody gets upset that somebody says happy holidays, it's like, well, you know how many holidays we actually have here, right?
Yeah.
More than 2.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think that they've been pretty much successfully secularized, at least here in America. At least the idea of Christmas has. Because when you think Christmas, the first thing that comes to mind will either be Santa Claus or will be Jesus, and a lot of times both. For a lot of people, it will be both, and one of those is most certainly more secular. Although there are some arguments that Santa Claus and Odin are kind of very similar. That the Saint Nicholas tradition was kind of pulled over from him, if memory serves.
Yeah, I think, but you bring up this point, Karen, about how like this is a dreary time of year, just like seasonally and also like economically for people as well.
Right.
And
I think a lot of our religious beliefs are actually based on it, and we don't always realize it. Like for example, Postada, I was reading that the Mexican tradition, the Catholic Church capitalized upon it to bring Christianity to the people. And I just, my background was in Mesoamerican archaeology, and I just wanted to read this little bit here from history. It says, according to Aztec cosmology, the sun god Huitzilopochtli was waging constant war against darkness. And if the darkness won, the world would end. To keep the sun moving across the sky and preserve their very lives, the Aztecs had to feed Huitzilopochtli with human hearts and blood. And I really think that
sounds more like Halloween than Christmas, if you ask me. But
sounds delicious.
Yeah, I know. I realized that. In fact, I knew this one woman. Her name's Holly Cannon, and she's a wonderful singer and songwriter whose background is in folk music of Britain. And she said at one of her concerts that the reason that Christmas was so big in the British Isles was that it was actually a law of the noblemen to feed the people during this time. Because when you have a society where it grows dark early and everybody's hungry, the noblemen were obligated to make sure the serfs kept alive, basically, because who else is going to work the fields later, right?
Who's going to pay taxes at that point?
Yeah, exactly. So this was like during a feudal society where the wealth was really held by just a few people. And it was also people just became depressed. And I know this seems like maybe, in our culture, we don't think how important this is. But if you think about a lot of the people that keep clinging to religion, which is a lot of untrue things. I mean, I think you and I would both, you two and I would agree that Huitzilopochtli does not need to wage a war in heaven to keep the sun coming back during the solstice, right?
Yes.
So in order to get rid of some of these ideas that are bad ideas, I think we need to address human needs.
Absolutely.
And I don't even know where I'm going with this. I just thought it would be interesting to bring it up because you're talking about truth wanted. We want things to be true. We want to believe true things. But there are human needs that are more emotional.
Oh,
and more
for sure.
intuitive.
Oh, Karen, you're hitting on my heartstrings here because I identify very hardly as a humanist. And I put that on the forefront on a lot of what I do. And I consider Truth Wanted to be a humanist project because I want to address human needs first more than anything. And it's kind of like been a life purpose for me to address it in the ways that I can. And one way of doing that is doing the show, but also in just everything I do, I want to incorporate people into human community and let people learn about human culture so that they can all understand that there's this beautiful tapestry that we're all kind of a part of as mankind, and the people need to realize that. And this time of year can be so hard for people, especially because when you feel like you're not a part of that tapestry, when you feel like you're outside and not looking in.
Ostracized is horrible.
Absolutely, yeah.
Everybody else is happy around you.
And there are like real scientific things we can look at to kind of address some of those issues and put it in kind of that perspective. I mean, like if we're talking about like suicide rates, for example, and we know why they're happening at this time of the year, we can see like I know one of the highest rates of suicide in the country is in Alaska. And that's kind of interesting. You can look at that from different perspectives. You could say maybe it's the lack of, in general, these people are living in sparse populations. That might be part of it. It might be the part of the area of the world that they're living in. It's kind of colder. It's darker a lot of times of the year. And you can see that the human contact, essentially, and human togetherness is vital to our personal health and to our growth. And we don't often address that as secularists, atheists, pagans, whatever you want to call it, because, well, it's just not something that's in our narratives. We don't always have the narratives to do that. As a Christian, you're able to do that because you're joined together in the body of Christ for a service and remembering the death of your Savior that you collectively hold to be true. And that's something that we don't have. We have to navigate our own ways through our own friends and family. And if it were up to me, and if I were to build a secular community to help address that, I would say there are new narratives that we could probably give ourselves, new ways of thinking and unifying us. One way that I like to do it is just being here in the ACA. I like talking to the other people and the other show hosts here, and I'm a part of this community now, which is really awesome. I want people to be a part of the Truth Wanted community. Like, I want that to be a thing. Maybe that's what we need, is more people getting excited for Truth Wanted. But it's an interesting perspective that I think more of us could hold, is this idea of viewing human problems through being fixed by human communities, right?
Right. And Suris and Dan, maybe you can answer me this question. When you go home to visit your family just during Christmas and you feel a little lost and out of place, how do you handle that? I'm asking for myself too, because, I really love Thor and Odin. I did. I just adored them. I want them to be real. I still want Thor to be real. Who cannot love Thor, right? But at this time of year, I think it's kind of tough. I don't have my pagan friends around me anymore. And when I do go to people's houses for Christmas and they're praying to Jesus, that's just not really where I'm at.
Suris, why don't you go ahead and go first, because I went on a little tangent there.
Fair enough. So for me, generally what it comes down to is I'll be as respectful as I possibly can, as long as there's nothing that's directly infringing on me. So everybody bows their heads for prayer. I will be silent. I will let everybody do their thing. If somebody wants to say, hey, it's the reason for the season, well, it's one of them, one of the like 50-ish maybe. So sure, I can give that, and I can kind of just let all that slide. Unless somebody specifically tells me what I should or shouldn't do on that holiday, which luckily in my family, that's not something that really happens, then I would say at that point, you can just kind of, be as respectful as possible and be fine. It does suck, though, a little bit to feel like there's that part of that holiday that you're not really able to participate in as much. Because for me, like 2 years ago, my mom sent me I think it was a nativity that we got. She was like, here's your first nativity. And it was like a year and a half after I became an atheist. And I'm just like, well, this is awkward. So there are certain portions of it that will suck and feel like you can't really participate in if the culture that you're going back to is one that you've left in a religious sense. But best thing I can ever find is just to be as respectful as possible.
So you just triggered a memory in me, Suris, that I completely put away. It was last year for Christmas. My mother got me a Christmas ornament that said something about like it was referring to like the wise men or something, and she like and there was some little thing about how wise people follow Jesus and stuff, and she got this for me, I guess, like after she had or before she had kind of figured out what I was doing with my faith transition. So and gosh, I guess I put that away because that was such an unpleasant thing, and
then it just kind of came flooding back.
Yeah, and that's got to be the experiences of a lot of people, probably even worse than that, of going home and not being able to feel like they're at home anymore because they aren't a part of these traditions and can't talk in the same language as well. I think that's also an important point. The way that we communicate with each other is also going to be different. So solution-wise, if there are other friends you can spend the holidays with, I say go for it. Spend time with the people who care about you and who can accept you for who you are. You always have to remember that most people who have these beliefs, a lot of them mean it sincerely, and the fact that they reject you is just more their beliefs talking sometimes than them. Sometimes it is them, but not always, right? And I try to remove myself from that equation of, when I'm talking to my parents about these kind of religious concepts, because in their eyes, like, I am a son who's going to hell, and that's not fun to think about. But I don't blame them for that in that sense, because I mean they're great parents in every other respects, but you have to kind of navigate that, and that's tough.
Yeah, that's why I have a whole video on my channel dedicated to whether or not the idea of hell is a threat. Just the idea when somebody's coming at you with salvation, is the idea of hell just the underlying threat whenever somebody comes